Hello and welcome to what I'm going to call the Bible Study Rewind, simply because it's just going to be a brief overview of the last class that we had at our congregation. Now, COVID has kind of started this whole thing where we started putting our lessons online whenever we could, and sermons and that sort of thing whenever we could. And I've tried different types of iterations, most specifically last week with a live thing in the building, and it really didn't work well. It took me forever to make it with just graphics. I didn't want to film it, that's my point. I didn't want to film it. So I basically just recorded the audio and I made a bunch of notes based on that. I'm going to go over the notes and based on the replies from the members in the congregation that replied to what we're studying. Sorry that took so long to explain. So we are in Deuteronomy chapter 5. Deuteronomy chapter 5. And in chapter 5, Moses breaks into explaining the laws and the things they were supposed to follow. And he starts, of course, with the Ten Commandments, which makes complete sense. So just by way of backing up a little bit, Deuteronomy is basically Moses writing the last bit of advice and reminders to the people to build their faith so that when they go into the land, they don't have a whole bunch of troubles. That's the issue, is people deviate from what God tells them to do and they get into trouble. So this is his last part of his life, and he's going to write this book to them so they understand God's law and they understand what it is God's requiring of them. And we are not under that law. This is the first thing that we understand as Christians. We're not under this law. However, the applications of understanding God through the law was to draw them to faith, and it helps us understand what God is looking for, not only in the Israelites, with the Jews. He's looking for basically the same thing from us. We just are no longer under the system of law any longer. We are under a system of grace, and which is exhibited which is fulfilled when we grow our faith in God and obey Him. And there's a lot of other things that the church can help you with if you need that sort of help. At the end of this brief summary, you can go to our website. It will be listed at the end of this video, and I'll put it I'll put a link there as well. And you can ask any questions that you want, or you can comment if there's a comment section. So Deuteronomy chapter 5 comes off the heels of Moses doing several things for them in the beginning, chapters 1 through 4. He goes over a little history, talks about some of their failures. He talks about some of their successes. They have overcome the giants in the land. There were big people, much bigger than them in the land, and that was what scared them originally. And some 38 and a half years prior to this, when they fell because of their lack of faith. And now we have a whole new generation that Moses is addressing. So by chapter 4, he's telling them about some of their failures just recently at Baal Peor, to remind them that they need to listen to God and they need to be on guard for themselves. He starts a long thread of being on guard. You need to be careful with what you do. Make sure you don't deviate from the things I'm about to tell you. So this is mostly about reminders and that sort of thing. And we have to understand that he's speaking to a very immature crowd, maybe of millions. It depends on who you talk to as to how many people there were. And he knows what to expect from them. And so this is why he says what he says. Now, we have already covered several of the commandments, and we covered the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me, and then you shall not make a graven image for you, which seemed to be hand in hand. It makes sense. You're not going to make idols to worship. This doesn't make sense. God is saying blatantly and outrightly, there are no other gods. You better not go after any of this stuff in any shape or form. There's no allowance at all for that. And then you shall not take the name of your God Jehovah in vain, which covers all sorts of things. We know that today it's very common for people to use the name of Jesus the Christ and God also about all sorts of flippant things, making God common. God is not common, and this is what he's telling them. I'm not common. I'm your Savior. I'm your deliverer. I want you to be my children. Treat me with respect. And he's having you tell them this again because they're very immature and they're very forgetful. And it's not so that we can say, look at those people who are very forgetful. It's because we're forgetful too. Things have not changed that much. So in our class, we talked about the Sabbath day. We only covered 2 more of these commands. And I thought it was great. It was a great class. If you can come, I would invite you to come because there are a lot of good Bible students in this class, and I'm just there listening and learning myself from so many of them, and from their wisdom. Many good Bible students. So I would say, and what I mean by that is, we never stop being a Bible student. We're always learning from God's Word. We're never that smart to where we can read it once and know it all. So observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And if you wanted to read about that, you could go to Genesis chapter 2. That would be a good source to read about why it happened. It was like God created the world in 6 days. And then on the last day, he rested. And so he's telling them, I want you to do this. Now, this is many hundreds of years later. I want you to continue this. And we'll read what he says in this passage about keeping the Sabbath day. He says in chapter 5, in verse 13, 6 days you shall labor, and you shall do all your work. And the 7th day shall be a Sabbath to Jehovah your God. And you shall not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your slave, nor your male slave, nor your female slave, nor your ox, nor your donkey, nor any of your livestock, nor your stranger that is within your gates, so that your male slave and your female slave may rest like yourself. And remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Jehovah your God brought you out from there by a mighty hand and by a stretched out arm. On account of this, Jehovah your God has commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. So there's the command. God's telling them to do like he did in the beginning of creation. And man, I got some really great insight into what people were thinking about this. My answer is pretty basic as usual. No work was to be performed on this day, neither by human nor beast, and ceremonially no work was allowed. This is the physical manifestation of its observance. But there's more meaning to it than adherence physically. There's more meaning to it than that. It redirects the heart and the mind back to God. We're remembering what God did in the beginning. It mimics Jehovah. And that's something that God just says over and over throughout this whole book. It mimics Jehovah as he was in the very beginning. It should remind the doer of him. It is a time to be quiet and reflect. Typically at the end of Sabbath, in the evening, there would be a worship service. So it is about remembering God and our relationship with him. So there you go. It expands. It's a lot more than just not working that day. And of course, we know that by the time Jesus came along, it became a big issue because the Pharisees were trying to determine, well, what can we do on Sabbath day? How far can you walk? And can you cook this? Can you do that? And it just became a burden to the people. And that was what some people were talking about. It's about our communion with God. So let's see what people were saying about that. Keep it pure. When God says keep it holy, he means keep it pure. Keep it clean and sanctified, something like that, separated out for God and you to remember God. Everything was not to do any work. No one was to do any work. And a couple of guys came out and talked about it's about remembering, because we're forgetful people. Everyone is like that. We're forgetful. God knows this about us. Moses knew that about them. And it relates to their slavery. And likewise, and this was fascinating to think about, it's like when we remember Jesus, when we partake of the Lord's Supper. We partake of the Lord's Supper every week at the Churches of Christ, just because that's the example. And Jesus releases the Christian from their slavery, from sin. And so we see this great parallel from the Old Testament. Hundreds and hundreds of years later, Jesus fulfills that and makes it real for everybody, which makes our covenant even stronger and greater than anything ever, and for all future generations as well. It takes us back to a time when man would commune with God on that day. And again, churches typically have a day like Sunday that they do this thing where they meet in churches and they maybe spend the day with their families and remember God and pray together and that sort of thing. If you're not doing that in your own family life, you should think about that. Communing with God is what strengthens our faith. That includes prayer or any time, not just on Sunday, right? And this is kind of where we ended up. We need to be ready to take time as God regulated. It's for our own good. That's what one of the members was talking about. It grows our faith. This is a blessing by God, and we should look forward to it. And the member talked about how it became, when people started over-regulating it, it became a burden. It's not a burden. It's about resting and thinking about God and the beauty of who He is and His strength and His sureness of His promises and all those things. Some people may take offense to our work. In other words, if you're a person who understands that we're not under the law and you work on Saturday and somebody sees you working, they may be offended by that. What should I do, even though we're not required to keep the Sabbath? And we discussed that for a little while, and we kind of just talked about how we need to consider our neighbors and maybe use that as an opportunity to teach them the what it is that we believe. We are not under the old law, although we are under its precepts. We are not bound by that law. We don't go off and sacrifice animals when we sin and do all those sorts of things that God required of a specific people. God did not require this covenant for all people. It was just for Israel. Remember, remember that the rest are both required to accomplish this time. I wrote some really horrible notes, but it basically, just remember that this is the time that we devote to God. And it's important to remember that, not only because it helps us, but because that sends a physical signal to God of the condition of our heart. That's what He's looking for. That's what obedience is. It's a physical manifestation of our faith. I say that all the time, maybe too much, but I can't overstate that. I really can't. Sabbaths are punctuated with worship. So again, we're directing our minds toward God and what He's done for us. Is it okay to work on Sunday? Well, the question came up, is it okay to work on Sunday? Well, under our current covenant with God, there are no directions that are the same as the Sabbath. In other words, where the Sabbath said block out a whole day. We don't have that directive. We do have the directive where we see the saints meeting on the first day of the week. So we see this new covenant where it's no longer, the emphasis is no longer necessarily on the last day of the week, but now it's on the first day of the week. That's the covenant that Jesus brought in, and it's almost like you would say, well, it's like a new beginning, the first day of the week. And I just throw that in there myself, because that's what I was thinking. In today's culture, some jobs require that you work on Sunday. And so, should somebody feel guilty if they have to work on Sunday? Well, there's some people who would say you should, because you should be in church. Well, sometimes it's just not possible. And if you can do that, if you can put the church first, good for you. And you should be. But if you work in a job, like, say you're a police officer, or if you're a firefighter or something, or if you're in one of the armed forces or something where you have to work on Sunday, you have to work on Sunday, whatever it might be. I'm not trying to single anybody out because they're more important. It's just if you find yourself in a financial situation where you have to work on Sunday, you have to work on Sunday. The idea is that you're blocking out time for God, and maybe even more, not maybe more importantly, but equally important, that you would find time to block out time for your church brothers and sisters, those other people who are struggling in life to get through dealing with the world as a Christian, because it's not easy all the time being a Christian in this world. So those were the sorts of points that we got to and we came to. We should be making sure we set aside time to commune with God and with the saints. This is what the new covenant is looking for. The Christian paradigm deals with the first day of the week. Jesus has changed this requirement. It's not the same as the Sabbath. Praying and meditating to God, we stop work, and we simply commune with God and meditate on Him. Think about Him only, and deal with Him only. We pay attention to Him only. Okay. The next one is honoring your father and mother. So we're kind of moving out of the relationship with God in these 10 commandments, and we're moving into the relationship with other people, this specifically the family, where He says, in verse 16, honor your father and your mother as Jehovah your God has commanded you, so that your days may be prolonged, and so that it may be well with you in the land which Jehovah your God is giving you. Simple, right? It's a simple sort of command. Honor your father and mother. Now that sounds easy enough to know what it is, but we kind of ran into several things on this, and I'm going to do this on Sunday, but I'm going to do it now as well. On Sunday, I said that this was the only command that dealt with the family, but that's not true. The next one deals with the family as well. So I'm going to change that up a little bit and rescind what I said and amend it, and that's okay. These things, you look at things and you go, you know what, this is dealing with the family as well. But this one is definitely about the family. And the most interesting thing about it is, to me anyway, is that it's a very simple command. There are a lot of things God could have said about the family, like, and the son, maybe, and the son will get everything, and which is their custom during the day. I don't know how they got to that custom. That was just their custom, that the son would get this triple inheritance, and then everybody divided up what was left, because he was supposed to carry on the family name and all of that. God didn't get into that as far as we know, at least not in this law that I can see here. He's just saying, honor your father and mother so that it will go well for you when you get into this land. This was the only command with the promise, and that was the promise. And we talked a little bit about that. Honor means to put a heavy emphasis on something. It means heavy. That's what it means. It means this better be important to you. Your parents better be important to you, children. Remember that. And it's interesting that I already said this. It directs the subject to consider the order of things, and we talked about that. It also puts a lot of responsibility on the parents, and that's my comment. And we'll get into what some other people said, but I think it puts a lot of responsibility on the parents to be honorable. Now, we'll get into some other opinions about it as well, and not that I don't disagree with them, I do agree with them, but we'll get into that. The child that puts weight or respect on the parent is exercising an understanding of the basics of practicing love. A child may not agree with parents, and most children don't agree with parents. So many times, we think as children, well, I'm ready for this. Don't tell me I can't do this. But God is saying, doesn't matter what you think. You need to respect them. You need to honor them, and that's what honor is you obey them. And we'll get into some of these other issues with what that comes with that. The very well-being comes from the parent, right? If you're living with a parent, under a parent's roof, they're the ones who are supplying that to you because God's supplying it to them. There is order. It is absent of rebellion, and that's the bigger thing God's looking for. He's saying, I don't want you rebelling against me. I don't want you, questioning me and accusing me of things. He's already been upset because of that. And he's saying, I want the rest of you to look the same way when it comes to your parents. This is a command, and in my opinion, it does put more emphasis on the parents. But the command is to the children. And as a parent, I would say, I feel a lot more weight as a parent. I feel a lot more weight on my shoulders to be an honorable man, or an honorable dad. Even though I don't know if you ask my children, they may not think I was that great of a dad. I'm not saying one way or the other. You'd have to ask them. Don't ask them. Anyway. So here's what some of the other members were thinking about this command. The promise was a long life in this land that they were going to. So this is very important to remember. This is how important this is. It was very important back then. It's still important today. Parents should take note. And Ephesians talks about the father not frustrating his children, meaning don't be unreasonable. Don't come off like you're God and you're going to have to do everything I say without having compassion and love for your children. And I'm inserting some of my own think-sos in there, but that's what Paul was talking about. Don't frustrate your children. You have to be just. We have to be just in everything that we do and say. The command does not allow excuses to not honor your parents. And so this is something that a lot of people don't want to think about. I mean, what if you have a terrible parent? The study shows that, and somebody inserted this thought, that the study shows that people who have high regard for God also have high regard for their fathers. And she also inserted the fact that sometimes fathers may not seem like they deserve high regard, but you can still have a high regard for somebody and because you understand the position they took when they took on the task of being a father and mother. So that was a very interesting. Perspective, and it is very, very well noted. God is looking for the respect of authority. That's it. Why? Because He's an authority. And if you take on the persona, if you take on the habit of questioning God continually, you're going to get into trouble. And this is what happened to the Israelites early on. A strong family will result in a strong nation that has the focus on God. Honor may not always appear to be deserved. The directive lasts a lifetime. It does not go away in adulthood. It may actually increase in adulthood. And somebody brought up that sometimes this is a financial responsibility. This is how you honor your parents later in their life if they need financial assistance. I think that's what she meant. You're helping your parents even into your later years, and this is very true. These are all just very easy ways of fulfilling God's requirement here. So honor means heavy, or to place an importance on something. If a parent is terrible, they are still your parent. Maybe the best thing we can say about them is they did the best they can with what they had. And that becomes the issue, is when we start talking about them. But it's also the issue of the way we look at them. We can't carry a grudge against them. God doesn't want us being a bitter people, especially towards our parents. We have an understanding that they have a soul, and they still belong to God, even if they're sinners. Perhaps the best we could do with some is pray that they come to know God. And this requires forgiveness and a release of the burden of bitterness that we might carry. Carrying around bitterness is never going to be a good thing for us. It's like, we need to incorporate understanding. But it's like there's an old story about, if you had a big coat, like a big trench coat full of pockets, and every time you were carrying a grudge, you put a rock in there, and you never let those grudges go, and you never forgave anybody, you would just be burdened with it. And that's kind of what is similar with this, that we don't carry grudges. God's people don't carry grudges. Now, we might get hurt, and it doesn't mean that we can't express that, and it doesn't mean that we can't seek a resolution with that person, and maybe some sort of reconciliation or whatever that might look like. But we are not to grow bitter. And this is what God is looking for in His people. Okay, that was it. We only covered 2, but believe me, there was a lot more discussion. And so you're invited, if you can come, to be a part of this Bible study. We'll be studying the rest of this chapter next week on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock at the Santee Church of Christ. Thank you, and maybe we'll see you there.